I grew up without my mother. She left me and my father when I was barely a year old. After a long time, I found out that she had run away with a lover. Apparently, there was no place in her happy future for me. My family tried not to mention my mother. Only once my grandmother said that my mother had gone to get a happy life and was now living somewhere abroad. I did not specify anything, and my grandmother never returned to this conversation. One thing I do not understand even now, how he was able to abandon her 1-year-old child, and not once during this time do not remember him. Women often reproach men for being too cruel. Nonsense. On the way to personal happiness, a woman will stop at nothing. She will sweep away everything in her path. Everything, including her own children. I now realize women are far superior to men in cruelty and guile. A woman owes no one anything. My father, after my mother's departure, did not marry for a long time. Did he love me? It is difficult to say unequivocally. Sometimes it seemed to me that he transferred his resentment against his wife, who had run away, to me. At any rate, I lived at my grandmother's, and my father occasionally visited me, bringing me some penny toy. He devoted his life to work and his career. He was lucky enough to own a big, thriving construction company. When I was 14 years old, my father finally got married. I remember the wedding well. The groom, a 40-year-old stately man, and the bride, a young, dazzlingly beautiful girl, Alina Sergeyevna, almost 20 years younger. Guests, toasts, a fancy restaurant. That's how I got my stepmother. When I was 18, I joined the army. After a year of service, I went to military school. I didn't want to go back home. 4 years later, I graduated as a lieutenant in the army and immediately found myself in one of the many hot spots. I was badly wounded. It was very badly injured. I had lost a lot of blood, and when they took me to hospital, I was in critical condition. After a month, I fully recovered. Intensive therapy and youth. That was the secret to my speedy recovery. I also fell in love. Olio worked in the hospital as a nurse. There was no one better for me than her. Slim, with green eyes with a mist, she for me was the epitome of the best qualities of a woman. Sometimes I caught envious glances from my roommates, and I was bursting with pride that this beauty had chosen me among the large number of men in this population. As a result, by the time I was discharged from the hospital, I was ripe for marriage. Besides, Olga was already transparently hinting at it. I did not go to meet my future wife and father. My father did not care about my fate. I heard rumors that he divorced Lena, but I didn't know the details. Yes, to be honest, they did not interest me. At the medical examinations, the kind doctors spent a long time groping me, looking at my tests and cardiogram. I got the impression that if they could, they would have tasted me, but they didn't. They didn't bite me, but instead handed me an opinion, fit for further service without restrictions. I was given a month's leave for rehabilitation and marriage. The procedure for getting married was simplified for military personnel, and a week after we started our vacation, we got married. Right after our wedding, Olga and I went to the south to the sea. Then we stayed with her parents and sister. But everything comes to an end sometime. My vacation was over too. I got my notice and went with my young wife to a new duty station. I soon got into the rhythm of military life. I was appointed a company commander of a separate reconnaissance battalion, and I had almost no free time. I spent days at my unit. Olga was sitting without work, gradually transforming from a sweet girl into a ruthless bitch. People go crazy from idleness, all the more so for young, unexperienced women. When I came home from work, I wasn't greeted by my loving wife, but by an enraged fury. She was picking on everything. A plate that wasn't washed, shoes that weren't on straight, a jacket that had been left behind. I tried my best to support my wife, knowing that this was not an easy time for her. Olio was already pregnant. I really hoped that she would change for the better with the baby, and I looked hopefully at her solidly rounded belly. Was I having a good time with her? I think so. She loved me after all, in spite of everything. I still remember her hands scratching my back as she wriggled under my weight. "My love," she sobbed. "Just don't stop." After Vicky was born, it was as if life began to get better. Olga took care of her daughter all the time, and our relationship improved noticeably. But I began to notice that sometimes a chill ran between us. Olga kept away from me, averting her eyes when talking to me. I did not bother with all sorts of nonsense, leaving my head to the service and family problems, and there was a lot of them. Olga was so exhausted during the day that she no longer had the strength to get up at night to see the baby. I tried my best to help my wife. I nursed Vika at night, changed diapers, sometimes fell asleep in the kitchen from exhaustion, resting my head against the refrigerator. But time inexorably passed, Vika grew up, and our family life gradually settled down. So we lived another year. On vacation, I did not work out, although I plowed day and night in anticipation of a vacation. But there was always a good reason, and my vacation was postponed to a later time. Olga and her daughter went to their parents for the whole summer. The grandparents did not dote on their granddaughter, and the changes did Olga good. She came back tender and affectionate. Our intimate life after that was again filled with bright colors. At the end of the summer, our battalion, as part of the Russian contingent of UN peacekeeping forces, was transferred to Mali, a republic located almost in the center of the African continent. A civil war broke out there, and the peacekeepers ensured separation of the warring parties. At first, we corresponded with Olga. She told me the news and told me how her daughter was growing up. But over time, the letters became fewer and fewer until they stopped altogether. I had mobile communication with my motherland, but it was in its infancy in Mali, and it was impossible to reach home. Half a year later, I was called back to Russia, and I was on the first plane home. I did not know why the trip was over before the deadline, but I did not care. The main thing is that soon I will embrace my beloved wife and daughter. My duffel bag hardly contained all the presents for my beloved girls. When I arrived at the airport, I tried to call Olga, but her phone was off all the time. I left my duffel bag in the hallway and went into the apartment. There was no one in the large living room, and my daughter was asleep in her crib in the bedroom. But from the kitchen came a man's voice and a woman's laughter. I quietly approached and opened the door. A man, stripped to the waist, was sitting at the set table with a glass in his hands. On his lap, laughing squealingly, was my Olga in a short t-shirt. I immediately recognized in this macho the head of the military trading company, Major Kamarov. What a bastard! A rat in the rear. There had been rumors in our garrison for a long time that he was harassing officers' wives. Rumors are rumors, but no one ever caught him red-handed. But now he's caught. I suddenly realized that I was involuntarily pulling out the tactical knife hanging in its plastic sheath on my right hip. They were so engrossed that they didn't even notice me, even though I was standing literally 2 steps away. Strangely enough, for some reason I wasn't surprised by what was happening. It seemed like I was seeing this erotic show from the sidelines. It was as if I had been prepared for such a turn of events beforehand, but I only felt a fleeting but very painful prick of the heart. My whole life with Olga and me flashed before my eyes in the blink of an eye. I just could not understand one thing. Why was she doing this to me? For a moment, I thought that all this was some bad dream, that I was about to wake up and see my beloved wife sleeping next to me, that she would smile in her sleep, as usual, and hug me tenderly with her warm hand. The reality was so hurtful and unfair that tears even appeared in my eyes. Finally, they saw me. Olga recoiled in horror. Her beau slowly began to rise, not removing his frightened, fat eyes with a knife in my hand. I shifted my gaze to my hand. The dim light played ominous glints on the sharply honed blade. For a moment, it seemed to me that death himself was dancing on the tip of the knife, impatient and ruthless. "Don't," Yura, please don't. I'll explain everything now. In a frightened, broken voice, my wife whispered. She apparently thought that I was about to kill them both. A puddle formed under the lover, a sharp smell of urine. He seemed to have wet himself with fear. I remembered my daughter, smirked, and put the knife back where it belonged. I spat under my feet, turned, and, without saying a word, walked out of the kitchen. Olga, sobbing, ran after me, something tearfully shouting, trying to stop me, grabbing my hands on his jacket. But I silently pulled her away with my hand, grabbed my duffel bag, and stepped out the door. I didn't delay. I filed for divorce the next day. Olga tried to talk to me, but I avoided meeting her in every way possible. One day, she did manage to get through to me. Snot, tears, tried to blackmail me with a baby. Then she begged me to forgive her. I listened to her sobbing into the receiver for a while, and then I hung up without saying a word. At the trial, my wife diligently poured slurry over me, accusing me of all the mortal sins. Especially poignant was the accusation of adultery. Supposedly, I often went on long trips because I had a mistress and not one. All the time we lived together, I abused her and the child, in every way humiliating and even occasionally beating her. She was even willing to show bruises from the beatings right in the courtroom. These accusations were confirmed by an anonymous witness, an unkempt woman with a kind of sour expression on her face. Olga tried not to look at me the whole time, diligently averting her eyes. I even respected her. From a commonplace whore and cheater, she, before my eyes, was turning into a victim of domestic violence, deprived of care and affection. She was forced to throw herself into the arms of her lover in search of comfort and peace of mind. I listened in silence to this nonsense without objecting or arguing. Of course, there were bruises on her body, only not from beatings, but from hickeys. An elderly judge with a horse face looked sympathetically at Olga. Women's solidarity. All men are bastards, and we women are such knave fools. Bottom line, divorce. Alimony. With my daughter can meet only once a week and only in the presence of his mother. But here I have nothing to snatch. The housing was official, and there was nothing else I gained during the marriage. My grandmother's apartment was in a different place and was not subject to division. My lover, Major Khmyrov, who smelled of urine, did not show up at the trial. Apparently his wife wouldn't let him in. When we were leaving the courthouse, I asked Olga, "Aren't you ashamed?" She lowered her eyes and silently brushed past me. The chilly northern wind was trying to tear the yellow leaves clinging to the wet asphalt. The streetlights were lit. I'd walked leisurely down the drizzly street, passing my shadow from one street lamp to the next, like a Baton. I felt sick to my stomach. I felt disgusted that I had lived with a deceitful and promiscuous creature for several years. Surprisingly, I was calm. No despair or regret. I had received a good inoculation from family life, and only the wind knew how things would turn out. The next story is even more interesting and will not leave you indifferent. In it, the wife asked her husband to move out for a while to repair the relationship after a long marriage. Then the wife began to behave very strangely, and the husband decided to check. What happened next, you will find out right now. I've been married to my wife for 10 years and my son is 8. For the first 6 years, we lived simply soul to soul, for each other and for the child. Then the routine, everyday life. Her reproaches that I did not have enough money, that I could not find a normal job. When I changed jobs and began to bring more money into the house, her reproaches started in terms of not being home all day. She does not have enough attention, or my presence, or something else. A year ago, my wife got a new job and everything changed. Until then, she was annoyed by everything. How I eat, that I come home late, put my slippers in the wrong place, did not wash the dishes, could cause a scandal, and then changed drastically. Not to say that she became more affectionate, no, but she just completely stopped noticing many things In general, pay attention to them. In terms of sex, I did not refuse either, but I did it grudgingly, as if I was scrubbing the floors. I got a new haircut, dyed my hair blonde, changed my makeup. I began to have delays at work, then some incomprehensible business trips, then for 3 days, then for 10. She lied first about little things, and then about big things. Said she would stay overnight at his mother, supposedly she was seriously ill. And the next day I took her mother's fruit, and it turned out that she is in good health and feeling fine, and his daughter had not seen for 3 weeks. Or said that she and her friend Tatiana go to a cafe, and then I accidentally meet this Tatiana, and asked how they hanged yesterday, and her friend did not understand what we are talking about. At night, when my wife was asleep, I got into her phone. A messenger correspondence set the record straight. I miss you. Me too. When will I see you? I don't know yet. My husband seems to have a hunch about something. I barely got away with it yesterday. Just tell him everything. You know, I'm not sure I want to change anything in my life yet. I'm afraid of making a mistake. And there's no good reason yet. Let's just leave it as it is. And so on, and so forth in that vein. The conversation with my wife took place the next day. A difficult conversation, I tell you. At first, she denied it to the last, then admitted that yes, I was seeing someone else. Forgive me. Asked what she was missing. She answered that she must have missed something. The heart cannot give orders. Nothing is done in an empty place. She agreed that she was guilty before me, that she was mean to me, and if I wanted to divorce her, she would understand me and would not mind. I asked her what she wanted, if she loved him. She replied that she wasn't sure if she was capable of loving anyone at all, but she was fine with him. I asked her what about me. She said that I was a good father, husband, and man, that she was comfortable and reliable with me, but there is no longer that former passion as before. There is no attraction that she feels to her lover. I asked her what we should do next. She said she did not know, like you decide. I said, what if I don't want a divorce? What if I offer to forget everything and start over? Said I was ready to forgive her. She thought about it and said it wouldn't be like before, at least not yet. Suggested that we shouldn't be too harsh. We can always get a divorce, and we shouldn't forget that we have a son. She said that she was confused, very confused, that she needed some time to be alone, to sort out herself and her feelings. She asked me to give her time, and to do this she and I should live separately. She suggested that I go and live in a rented house. I said it was my apartment too, so why should I move out? She said that if she moved out, she was afraid it would be forever and then divorce was 100%. And she added that during this time, it is better for us not to cross paths at all, and I should not see my son either. That she would explain to him that I was away on a long trip. I rented a room in a nearby neighborhood. I couldn't find myself for 2 weeks. Then I wrote her first message. Hello, darling, how are you? How is your son? No answer. I also wrote that I missed them very much, that I missed them. No answer again. I tried to call, but she either did not pick up the phone or dropped it. Then she sent me a message saying that we had agreed, so why was I bothering her, and why was I tearing myself and her apart? When the time comes, she will contact me herself, but until then I have to wait and not appear in her life until she calls me. I asked her if her son missed me. Again, no answer. 3 hours later, she wrote to tell my son not to see me either. He thought I was out of town and out of the country. 3 more months passed. My wife and I had no contact. I transferred money to her card every month, leaving only money for gas, to pay for my rented room, and for a meager meal. It was my son's birthday. I decided that I couldn't wait any longer, bought a gift, and showed up uninvited. My son was happy to see me. He even cried. But what I saw at home shocked me. This guy my wife cheated on me with had actually moved his stuff into our apartment and was living with her. I caught them there together. She left him and her son sitting at the table, and she took me out into the hallway and threw a tantrum. said that I just showed up and ruined everything. That during the week, she wanted to call me, that she was going to voice to her lover too, that she wanted to break up with him and thought to stay with me, and I broke everything. I told her that she was cheating on me, that she kicked me out of our apartment on purpose to bring her lover into our apartment, that I was going to file for divorce and I wasn't going to take it anymore. She told me from the doorstep, "Oh, think what you want and do what you want. I don't care anymore." I left. A young woman moved into the apartment where I rented a room, and the landlady rented her another room. She was from out of town. She had come to work. She left her alcoholic husband, left her daughter to live with her sister for a while, said she would take her as soon as she got back on her feet. Anyway, at first we communicated as neighbors, then as friends. I can't say that I had any tender feelings for this woman. I just wanted to forget myself. A romantic relationship was beginning to take shape, when suddenly I get a message from my wife. "Hi, how are you? I feel very bad now. I can't take it anymore." I reply, "Why is there no one to comfort you?" "We broke up. He moved out the day after your visit." Answer, "What do you want from me now? Come please. I need you now more than ever. I know that I am very guilty before you and my son, but I can no longer, you understand. If you don't come, I'll just throw myself out the window. And we're on the 7th floor." I took off and came. The house is a mess, and she's no better. Despite the makeup that she hastily slapped on her face, you could see that her face was a little grayed, under her eyes bags and bruises. One silk chewy robe over her bare body, her dyed blonde hair sticking out in different directions. Despite the fact that her figure is slim, her breasts are quite impressive size and looked out from under the robe. I asked her why she called. She said she wanted me to come home for good. Also said that in fact, this is my home too. Asked, at least now do not leave her alone, or else she just cannot stand it. What's the matter? Lover dumped you. Said he didn't dump her, she kicked him out. She tried to hug me. I pushed her and demanded that she put on normal clothes, cleaned herself and her apartment. Otherwise her son would come home from school, and she and the house in such a miserable state. My wife began to whine about how stupid she was. She had caused me so much pain that she could not forgive me. I just said that enough already, get busy, it is disgusting to look at you. While she tidied herself up and cleaned up, I sat down in the kitchen and thought. I was waiting for this moment, that she would come to her senses and call me. I agonized, howled with boredom. And now, when I had already lost hope, that moment had arrived, but I no longer felt any joy. I was burned out after all that. Of course I wanted to get up and leave, but who knows what she had in mind. What if she really threw herself out the window, or God forbid, her son would get hurt? My son came home from school and asked me if I was going away on a business trip for so long. I answered that I didn't know what my boss would decide, but still stayed. A week has passed. My wife is silky, helpful, tried to seduce me into sex a couple of times, but I told her that now I myself need time. I don't want her like I used to. I haven't made any decisions yet, but the feelings I had for her, they're just gone. And I can't understand, what does she even want? Does she repent, or does she just not want to be alone after her lover left her? Why did she blackmail me into coming back when I was about to start a new relationship? What really happened between her and her lover that he disappeared, and I found her in such a pitiful and miserable state? After all that, I couldn't forgive her. I took all of her property and left my son with me, and I kicked her out the door. She was very mean to me, so I had no pity for her. A few years later, we crossed paths again, but she was in terrible shape. She was running around with different guys, doing bad things for money, but she wasn't in a long-term relationship. No one wants a wife who can cheat at any time. Honestly, I used to have thoughts of winning her back for my son, but they evaporated when I learned of her fate. I am now living happily with my new wife. She loves me and my son. We are planning to have a new baby. The final story of the day shocked me. It tells the story of a girl who decides to cheat on her boyfriend at a party. It was her fatal mistake.
My full name was Veronica, but everyone around me from an early age, including my parents, preferred to call me Nika. I grew up to be a nice, cheerful girl. I did well at school. From the first time I went to university, where I wanted, I was very attracted to painting and art in general. So from 8th grade, I purposefully prepared to enter the University of Culture Art department. Years of study passed very quickly and cheerfully. I got a diploma and some fame in the circles of young artists and collectors. And when I was able to recognize and appraise an ancient Byzantine icon of the 15th century, which then went to auction for the estimated amount announced by me, I have already been invited to appraise their treasures by quite wealthy collectors. Fame and respect among customers and colleagues is not only a prestige, but the opportunity to receive a good reward. So after a while, I moved into a luxurious 2-room apartment in the center of the city. At the same time, I started to build a 2-story country house. Though not a palace, but quite a cozy dwelling. In this house, I planned to place my own collection of icons, the beginning of which was laid in one of the expeditions to the Russian north in my student days. Based on the materials of this and other expeditions, by 1 year I had written and published a book, Antique Paintings of the Russian North, which quickly sold out and replenished personal libraries, specialists, art historians, and collectors. Young, beautiful, successful, and moderately cheeky. I was already shining at art auctions not only at home, but also abroad. For all that I took great care of myself with great taste. I dressed, played sports to be in great physical shape. Everything was fine, but I just could not choose a candidate for a husband. There were plenty of suitors. I was not picky in this matter, but I wanted to find the only one. One with whom I wanted to live to a ripe old age and die on the same day. One day, when I was returning from a vernissage organized by a rich acquaintance, I bumped the bumper of my car into a young soldier who was walking down the street. I was really frightened and jumped out of the car and ran up to the victim and asked him if he was okay, if there were any injuries. Only my pants were a little damaged. The young man smiled guiltily and tried to put the torn pocket back in place. "Are you sure you don't have any pain?" I asked suddenly, realizing that the unfamiliar man was attracted to me by something. "By the way, my name is Nika." Suddenly I blurted out, "Well, I'm Igor." The stranger looked at me and smiled again. "And let me give you a ride," I said, and I caught myself thinking that I really don't want to part with the man. "Thank you, I live around here." Igor opened the door and sat down next to me. "I'll show you the way." I acted like a fool. I tried not to take my eyes off the road, unexpectedly. I asked Igor, "And what do you like more, tea or coffee?" "Tea, actually, but coffee is okay too." He looked at me and smiled, and asked in response, "Do you want to invite me to tea?" "Yes, I do," he replied. "Oh my God, I've come to the point where I'm dragging a man into the house myself." Thoughts like drumsticks pounded on my head. "Well, if only with jam," said Igor and smiled again. From then on, things just kind of took off on their own. Date after date, and eventually we started living together. That's how we got married 2 years later. I have never regretted marrying Igor. We lived in an already country house. I was doing what I loved and earning good money. Igor was away at work. To be honest, I didn't even know what kind of service it was. But when my husband came home, I could see how hard he was mentally and physically. Over time, I began to realize that we live as if in parallel worlds, crossing paths only on weekends. And even then, if Igor had them. But this had no effect on my relationship with my husband. It even seemed to me that my love for him became more mature and meaningful. Periodically, Igor went on long business trips, and then I was off to work, starting to write a new book on old Russian painting and going on a new expedition to get the material. I spent days in the library, reading the diaries of my colleagues and devising a new route. From time to time, I was invited to consult with a collector, so I had even less free time. One day, when Igor was on another business trip, my close friend Laika invited me to his birthday. I first even wanted to refuse, but then decided to go. From work, too, sometimes you need a break. Celebrated at the cottage at Lisa's next suitor. There were quite a few people there, all bustling about, showing signs of attention to the hostess. I, too, got a lot of attention from the male half of the guests. When we sat down at the table, there was a young, imposing man next to me. Albert is a free artist. He introduced himself by pouring a dry red wine into my glass. "And what do you paint, avant-garde or cubism?" I grinned at the corner of my lips. "Why avant-garde? I'm a portraitist." Albert set his glass on the table, and not a bad one, I dare say. "Would you like me to paint your portrait? You have a very expressive face," he said. "Is it just the face?" Perhaps it was then that the wine went to my head, and I began to flirt with him. The painter was embarrassed, and then began to compliment me with even more fervor. By the end of the evening, I was pretty tipsy, and when Albert offered to see his work out of the blue, I agreed. I was back in my usual milieu, hanging out among the bohemians, and so I saw nothing criminal about going and seeing paintings by an artist I had never seen before. Albert's studio was in a one-room apartment on the 5th floor of an 8-story building. Albert's cluttered room, unfinished work, the smell of paints, all this inspired madness, and I myself did not fully understand how I found myself in bed with a free artist. I gave myself to him without foreplay. It felt good to snuggle up to him. I apologized for my revelations, but Albert knew all the weak points of a woman, and soon he had already made attempts in places where my husband did not even think. I was already in a drunken stupor, in sweet debauchery, and simply did not resist, but on the contrary, went along with him. In the morning, I woke up to the smell of fresh military coffee, afraid to spill the hot coffee. Carefully, I took the cup from Albert's hand. "Well?" asked the portraitist. "What do you mean?" I pretended I didn't understand the question and pulled the sheet over myself. "I was talking about coffee. What were you thinking about?" Mentally, I knew I was cynically betraying my husband, Igor, at this moment. But it didn't torture me. Remorse was good, and I didn't want to leave my new acquaintance. "But so, let's go on," interrupted my thoughts by saying Albert, and took the cup from my hand and put it on the table at home. I didn't return until the next day. I wasn't expecting Igor so early, so I wasn't afraid of my husband's sudden arrival. After 2 years of a quiet, measured life with my husband, I was tempted to go out. No, I did not feel remorse. I just did not know how to go on. Immediately stop the relationship with Albert, or conversely, to continue. The night and day spent in bed lover, I did not consider treason. What's the big deal? I'm not going to leave my husband. But I regretted a little bit, not flushed. Just one day, Igor stopped seeing me as a woman, stopped giving me flowers, saying compliments. In my heart, I felt my husband loved me, but his love was quiet, standard sex, and without any fanaticism. I was well aware that Albert was a womanizer. His extensive experience in bed told me that. A twisted fantasy. But the next morning, Albert texted me that he wanted to see me, and I couldn't resist. I spent the night in his arms again. The vicious liaison dragged on. I spent every evening with my lover, almost always staying the night at his place. Fortunately, Igor had not yet returned and could safely give himself to passion. Passion. At some point, I realized it wasn't love. I would never exchange Igor for Albert. Every time I went on a date, I convinced myself that this was the last time. But I couldn't help it, so I went to my lover again and again. "What could you possibly have in common with this soldier, kissing me?" Albert asked. "This man is not your type. You're so lofty, all about art." I was silent. Passion surrounded my head, and I didn't want to talk at all. Only pressed my lover's head tighter, giving him all my body and soul, listening to his caress. Almost a month passed. Albert had already begun to demand that I move in with him. He wanted to tell Igor himself about our relationship and at any cost to get him to divorce me. It got to the point that he was jealous of me to his own husband, and then I realized I didn't want that to happen at all. I had taken a walk, and that was it. Besides, my husband was due back any day now. When I told Albert that our meetings would no longer take place, he threw a fit and tried to hit me. He shouted at the whole staircase that I would not give him up so easily, and still sooner or later I will be with him. 2 days later, Igor arrived. He held me in his arms for a long time, as if he was afraid that I might disappear. I fussed around the house, setting the table, but Igor took me into the bedroom, and we loved each other for a long time. It seemed that my husband couldn't get enough, and at that moment, I realized that I had no one in the world more dear to me than him. The affair with the painter now seemed somehow unreal. It was in the past, and I didn't even want to think about it. 2 days had passed since Igor's return, and we couldn't get enough of each other. I felt a sense of guilt toward my husband that grew stronger every day. It was literally eating away at me from the inside. I didn't know what to do, how to redeem myself in front of Igor. Several times I tried to tell him everything, to throw myself at his feet and apologize for what I had done. But I knew that my husband loved me very much, but would never forgive me. I called all kinds of names to myself, but what's done cannot be undone. We were having breakfast and discussing our plans for the weekend. When the doorbell rang insistently, Igor opened the front door and saw 2 policemen. A full woman and a man rubbing their hands nervously. Looking out from behind my husband, I recognized Albert among the crowd. My heart felt uneasy, frozen. What did he want? Citizen Belogorsk Igor Vladimirovich. One of the policemen moved closer to Igor. You are detained. I don't understand. What am I being accused of? My husband looked around and looked at me in a kind of helpless surprise. Of domestic violence, of beating your own wife. Were you bullying her when you found out she wanted to leave you for her lover? The woman standing behind the police officers almost screamed. She pointed with her hand to the real Albert behind her. Mr. Rubinchik has written a statement saying that you are forcibly restraining both Mrs. Belogorskaya and systematically beating her. Igor turned to me. What does all this mean, Neka? Albert said, what it means is that we love each other and want to be together. Nika wanted to get a divorce and leave for me, but you locked her in the house. Albert squeezed forward and stood close to Igor. Look, he pulled out a flash drive and a stack of pictures and held them out to my husband. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw myself in the photo in my lover's arms. My eyes went black, and I began to crawl down the wall, fainting. The last thing I saw was Igor hitting Albert, and he fell into the arms of the policeman who had managed to catch him. When I came to, Albert was flailing around beside me. I was lying on the couch in the living room, open with a plaid and a cold towel on my forehead. The stranger sat in the chair across from me, staring at me in silence. What is the meaning of all this? What are you doing in my house? Where is my husband? Almost in a shorthand. Exhaled, don't worry, sweetheart, your husband won't hurt you anymore. He's been taken to the station. I hope this animal gets what's coming to him. In the meantime, we will prepare all the necessary documents for the divorce. The woman looked at Albert. Yes, dear Rosa Yakovlevna, she will do everything properly. I hired her as our lawyer. Albert stroked my shoulder affectionately. Fury swept over me. Get out of my house immediately. I rose from the couch, tearing the wet towel off my forehead. I love my husband, and I'm not going to leave him. Everything that's been said here about him and me is a lie. Is this your way of getting back at me? I threw a look of total hatred at Albert. He even ran for the door. I was already screaming at the top of my voice out of my house. It's okay, love. You'll come crawling back to me yourself, especially when your husband looks at all the pictures and the contents of the flash drive. It's a really fun movie out there. The studios will tear it down for a lot of money, but in the meantime, you can admire it for yourself. Come on, Rosa Yakovlevna. Nika wants to be alone. Albert put a stack of color photographs with a flash drive on the coffee table and left the house. The lawyer followed him out. I went through the pictures in silence, realizing that family life was over. No man would forgive such a thing. I didn't know what to do, to run, to get Igor out, to try to explain something to him, or to wait for him at home. Suddenly, I heard a noise under the cars driving by. The front door slammed. My husband walked into the room. "Have you been released?" Stupid question. I couldn't think of one. Silently, he made his way into the bedroom and began to gather his things, throwing them into his backpack. The essentials. He sat down across from me. There was so much unbearable pain and mental anguish in his eyes that I shuddered. "I'm leaving now. Don't look for me again. I won't come back, and I won't interfere with your happiness." My husband rose slowly. For a second, I thought he wanted to say something else, but Igor turned and took the wedding ring off his finger and placed it neatly on the coffee table, then threw the bag on his shoulder. And without saying a word, he left, carefully shutting the door behind him. Through the window, I saw him get into a cab, and a minute later the car disappeared around the corner. At that moment, I realized that I had lost practically everything in an instant. Now my reputation was on the line, and I had to go to war with Albert for dirt on me, so long as he has not spread it on the network.